Welcome in to the WalterPicks Fantasy Football Show. I'm joined with Sam, Big Boss Man CEO, and Seth, our lead content creator and Steelers creator. We have a lot to talk about because this week, it's a rough week for start sit. So everybody in this video, shout out to you guys for finding it. We'll go ahead and start with what we just witnessed of the Patriots backfield in Ramondre Stevenson and TreVeyon Henderson. For all of the TreVeyon Henderson truthers, he was drafted extremely early, possibly too early for the hype. But you look into what we saw last week with the backfield. For the past 2 weeks, Ramondre Stevenson has been acting as the RB1. If you look at all the snaps played, he had over half of the snaps. He actually split goal line snaps 1-to-1 with TreVeyon Henderson, which is kind of a good sign when you look at their snaps total. But third downs, it was Ramondre Stevenson. They actually used a lot of two running back plays on the field at the same time. Short yardage was all Ramondre. A lot of it was Ramondre. Now coming into a matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, which might look like a tough one, but if you look at their past few weeks, they have been allowing a lot of points to running backs. In week 1, it was 16.5 fantasy points to Breece Hall. And then in week 2, Kenneth Walker had, I believe, 18.8 fantasy points and over 100 yards rushing. Sam, what are we doing with this Patriots backfield?
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone's taken as big of an L as I have with TreVeyon Henderson, at least so far this season. He's in that tough area of fantasy where you can't drop him. You don't want to trade low on him, but you can't start him right now, even in this matchup. I don't think you can start a guy who's only getting 3 carries, under 35% rush share, back-to-back games. He went onto the field after Antonio Gibson in this last game. He also had multiple holding penalties deep in the game, barely saw the field after those. Those are always tough to see as a rookie. Ramondre, I do like, though. In this spot, I would start him. Like you mentioned, over 100 rushing yards allowed by the Steelers in their first 2 games, 1 to Breece Hall and 1 to Kenneth Walker. So yeah, I like Ramondre, who's going to lead the team in carries. And I don't feel great about drafting the 3rd string running back for the Patriots in the 2nd round, but I'm still holding out hope. I still think the ceiling is going to be there down the stretch. But yeah, I'm not starting Henderson in the many leagues that I have him in.
Yeah, and it definitely is a little bit of a risk because it's somewhat of a committee still, but what we've seen from the Pittsburgh Steelers, it is a spot where you can start Ramondre if you absolutely need him. And guys, make sure to hit that like button on this video. We're going to be doing these every single week, as well as a ton of live streams on the channel, so you will not have a lack of fantasy football information. And then when we go into our next start of the video, we will have our sits at the end, so make sure to stick around for that. We have Keenan Allen versus the Denver Broncos. Now, if anybody told you that Keenan Allen would be a top 15, top 20 wide receiver in fantasy football this early, you'd call him crazy. Now, he was the wide receiver 3 overall in the season the last time he was with the Chargers, but he's kind of giving Ladd McConkey a run for his money as far as target share goes. Last week, we just saw against the Raiders, he had 7 targets, 5 receptions, a good amount of yardage, and a touchdown. That's 2 on the season. Now coming into a matchup against the Denver Broncos and Pat Surtain. He was targeted a good amount last week. He was dealing with a bit of an injury and came back. He's relatively perfectly fine now. Seth, what are we doing with old man Keenan Allen? Are we starting him against this pretty decent Denver defense?
Yeah, 100%. We're going to start him. This guy was on my must draft list for a reason. You just look at last year's target share. It was pretty insane, and he's back in a comfortable offense. You look at he's right now 19.8 points per game. He's got 2 touchdowns. The target share 28%. And I honestly think Pat Surtain could be on Ladd McConkey. I think that certainly would make a lot of sense as well as the outside down the field guy. I think as the Denver Broncos, you want to keep everything in front of you. Hampton hasn't looked amazing up to this point. We may talk about him a little bit later, but Keenan Allen has. And there's so many wide receivers that maybe their quarterback is injured. Maybe they haven't been scoring over 10 fantasy points per game. The Eagles wide receivers that we may talk about as well, that you may be scared about at the very least, but you don't have to be scared about Keenan Allen with his target share, with his fantasy points, with his yards per route run, wide receiver 5, absolutely insane at this point. So I think you almost have to lock him into your lineup. And even if he doesn't score the touchdown, still a decent start both these first 2 weeks. So I'm locking in Keenan Allen in pretty much every league.
And then we get into our next start of this video. We have Jordan Mason getting a matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals here. And this is a spot where we can look to start him, especially when we have Aaron Jones questionable with an injury, already unlikely to play in this matchup. Now, Jordan Mason last week against the Atlanta Falcons didn't really do much. But when you look at the whole game total, the Vikings offense just did not do a lot in general. The Falcons defense was good. Aaron Jones was held to a little number of fantasy points when he was healthy. But Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason have been splitting almost 50-50 as far as their snaps go. Jordan Mason in week 1 had 15 carries in week 2. It's followed by only 9, but he is getting used in the receiving game as well. And now he's going to operate essentially as the main running back. We saw last year when he was the RB1 filling in for Christian McCaffrey, he was amazing, using the receiving game a decent amount, but mostly just pure rushing volume. And now a Cincinnati Bengals defense that is relatively positive in allowing fantasy points and yards on the ground to running backs. This is a guy that if we have no Aaron Jones, I know JJ McCarthy is also injured. We're likely going to have Carson Wentz starting at quarterback. As a Commanders fan, seeing him in his very short stint on that team, I am not excited about it. But guys, Seth, what is your opinion on Jordan Mason? Is he a strong start?
I'm excited to start him. I have him on a couple of my teams, and I'm locking him into my lineups, especially if Aaron Jones is out. I also like you mentioned that Carson Wentz is coming in at quarterback. I think a little bit more stability, a little bit more veteran presence, especially with how the O-line is playing, will be really solid. So I'm putting him in my lineups.
Yeah, and JJ McCarthy hasn't necessarily been playing lights out. So maybe Carson Wentz can do a little bit of something on his end of things. And Seth, you can go ahead and pull up Dak Prescott versus the Bears in this matchup. Now, Dak Prescott has been all over the place as far as his fantasy football value right now. Last week, obviously, we have the thriller of a game. If you guys got to watch that in real time, I'm sure you enjoyed it. Overtime against the Giants here. And he had over 20 fantasy points, 52 passing attempts. Probably not normal, but you get a matchup against the Bears. We just saw the Lions absolutely torch them. Multiple players going over 20 fantasy points. Jared Goff have a ton of passing attempts. This could be a spot where we look at Dak Prescott and see another similar situation. Now, I think we saw the best case scenario for Dak, but he is always projected to have some of the most passing volume. In the beginning of the year, he was projected to be top 2 in passing yards. I'll give this one off to Sam. What are your opinions? Are you trusting Dak Prescott this week?
Yeah, I feel fine with Dak this week. I think the pass volume will continue to be there. The Bears haven't just allowed over 50 points to the Lions. Talk about a revenge game for Ben Johnson. It was like a reverse revenge game for the Lions in that one. That game, by the way, between the Lions and the Ravens this week might have 100 points. But I am starting Dak Prescott this week in a lot of different spots, especially with all the QB injuries. The fact that you got a guy here that can pass over 40 times in the game, you're not going to be able to say that about many quarterbacks just in their range of outcomes in a given week. And I still think we haven't really seen the full unlock of George Pickens yet, who we might talk about later in the show. I don't think he's the easiest start sit at the moment, but yeah, I feel fine with Dak. I still think he's got a decent chance to lead the NFL in pass attempts, especially with Joe Burrow now sidelined. So yeah, I'm starting Dak in most spots this week.
Yeah, and another possible fringe guy that we can start and look at here is Bashaw Tuten. Seth, if you want to pull him up, getting a matchup against the Houston Texans. Now, he still is not the RB1. I do believe at some point, guys, if you're just looking into the future, that Travis Etienne's role will slowly decline. The schedule gets very tough late in the season. But when you look at week 3, it's a matchup against Houston, which isn't the best defense of all time. He can definitely produce against it, but how much usage will he actually get? We saw after the Jaguars got rid of and sent Tank Bigsby to the Eagles, his snap share jumped from 8% in week 1 to 25% in week 2, seeing about double the amount of carries and usage in the receiving game. So are we going to see a 2 running back by committee this early in the season against the Houston Texans, Seth?
I think we already saw it in week 1, because when they gave Bashaw Tuten the ball, he looked amazing. Every time he touched the ball, it was explosive. He was hard to bring down. He was making people miss. And we looked at, in the past, a little bit about Travis Etienne, and there's a reason why Tank Bigsby was taking his job last year. He wasn't very good. His yards per carry were not that great. He's explosive, but I like both these guys, especially in this game against Houston, because one of the things that you can do really well with both Etienne and Tuten is get the ball outside the tackle box in the screen game, in the pass game, and we use speed to get around this aggressive Houston defense. So I am excited to see what he's going to do this week. Now, am I going to start him in my lineups, trust him right now? I think you probably could. I think that's very risky. But if you have some people that are really underperforming, especially maybe you lost Aaron Jones, maybe you lost another running back, maybe your top guys that you drafted is not performing, I think Tuten does have quite a bit of upside here. And we'll just scroll over. This is why I like the WalterPicks app. You can see his snap percentage, 25%. Huge increase. Of course, Tank Bigsby was gone. He made a lot of usage out of that snap share, 30% rush share. So he did a pretty good job. I think it'll keep getting better each week, because when you look at the tape, he was I mean, was he clearly better? ETN wasn't bad either, but this guy was amazing. It's like, how can we get him the ball more? I think every possible opportunity. And I do want to give Sam an opportunity to talk about this guy because, Mr. Best Ball, we gotta pause here and just see what is the excitement level for someone that has Tuten in so many different leagues.
Yeah, and as high as I was on Trevion Henderson, his whole rookie running back class, it was just easier to get Tuten in drafts this year, right? Because he was going so much later. One of my highest rostered best ball players. I'm all aboard the Toot train in so many best ball leagues, and I got him in season long too. I think he's a bit of a risky start in season long leagues. He's definitely going to be a tough start sit decision most weeks because he's not the lead back on the team, and the Quinn Allen is playing as well. But yeah, the ceiling is going to be there, and if ETN goes down, Tuten's going to be a top 10 running back in fantasy football. That's the type of ceiling he has. So I honestly think I'd probably bench him this week. Hopefully have some better options. Like I think him versus Trevion Henderson, who I also said to bench, is actually pretty close. I think they're in kind of similar roles to some extent. I think Henderson probably gets more catches than Tuten. But yeah, the ceiling is so high here. 100th percentile size adjusted speed for Tuten. And I really don't think we've actually really seen that yet. Show up on the field in some of the big plays that he'll be able to generate this season. So really excited for that. But he's almost at 5 yards per carry. I think he'll keep getting the ball for sure. But I'm benching him this week. Really high on him still, though, ceiling wise. Like I don't think his ceiling is that much different, honestly, than Trevion Henderson down the stretch of the fantasy season.
Yeah, Sam, I agree with you there. I think if you picked him up off waivers, guys, you're in a great situation for late season. And that's honestly what we play for. If you lose the first week, maybe even 2 weeks, you're playing against the even odds of getting to the playoffs, but it's still 100% possible, especially if you have an app like WalterPicks on your side because they have a start sit tool. You can make some trades to create the best team of all time. And you should definitely check it out. We have it on screen here as well. But looking into DK Metcalf, Seth, if you want to pull him up on the screen, this guy has been one of my least drafted players throughout the year just because of the fit on this offense. It doesn't seem to work too well with Aaron Rodgers, and we see what he's done so far. Both his games were over 10 fantasy points in the double digits, which necessarily isn't terrible. Coming in this week against the New England Patriots, we've seen week over week some of these wide receivers absolutely torch this defense, mostly because Christian Gonzalez is not here. I believe he's projected to miss this game as well, if I'm not mistaken, which means it might be DK Metcalf season in a matchup that should be a pass-first script for the Steelers. Sam, what are you feeling about DK Metcalf this week?
Yeah, I don't know how you bench DK Metcalf this week. I mean, at least one of these Steelers, if not multiple of these Steelers receivers, are going to go over 15 points this week. Week 1, we see Geno Smith throw for over 300 yards against the Patriots. Over 200 of those yards went to the receivers, Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker. Week 2, we see Tua throw for over 300 yards versus the Patriots. Like Rodgers is probably going to flirt with 300 yards this week versus the Pats, and the Pats offense is definitely taking a step forward at the same time. Christian Gonzalez, the number 1 corner for the Pats, a legit, top 12 corner in the NFL, has not practiced this season with a hamstring injury. I think it's really doubtful that he plays this week. Maybe he will miss next week as well. He didn't go on IR, so you'd think he'd be back in week 3 or week 4 because IR puts you out 4 weeks. But it is sometimes a tough call, early in the season, whether or not a guy will miss 4 weeks or not. But yeah, hasn't practiced yet. Even when he plays, this secondary has a lot of holes. And the defensive line on the Patriots is also like above average. So it's going to be a pass-funnel defense, I think, all season. So yeah, I'm starting DK Metcalf. Wouldn't be surprised to see Calvin Austin have a bit of a sneaky week as well. I think he's like a deep sleeper off waivers or deep in the bench this week. But yeah, I'm definitely starting DK Metcalf versus the Patriots.
Yeah. And in the 32-person fantasy football league we have with all the WalterPicks people, I do have Roman Wilson rostered on my team. So I'm hoping at one point maybe he can turn into something for this team, but we're definitely not starting him. A guy we can probably put in our lineup, though, and we will discuss here, is Jalen Waddle versus the Bills this week. Now, the Bills defense has been up and down. They let up 40 points to the Ravens. The Ravens offense might just be that good. And then 10 points to the Jets. To be fair, Justin Fields was injured for a lot of that game. But Waddle has sneakily been a flex guy for us. He played 82% of the snaps in week 2. He had a lower snap share in week 1, but that's just because they got blown out by the Indianapolis Colts. He sees 6 targets, 5 receptions, a touchdown. He has a good amount of fantasy points last week. Can he continue that against a Buffalo defense, which has relatively been positive in allowing fantasy points to wide receivers? Sam, I'll pass that one off to you again.
Yeah, I'm definitely starting Waddle this week. I mean, I just talked about the Patriots defense. I know these two teams played each other last week, and I watched every snap of the game. The Dolphins might have the worst defense in the NFL, and it's going to create these pass game environments where they also aren't really able to run. And yeah, the step forward in snap percentage, I think, was encouraging for Waddle. He did get banged up a little bit in week one. He didn't end up missing any time. He went back into that game in week one, but he ended up only playing in week one only 64% of the snaps. That was up to 83% here in week two. And the Bills are going to score more than 30 points in this game. And if the Dolphins offense can keep up at all, the Bills are going to score more than 40 points in this game. So this is definitely a game I want to target here on Thursday night. I think both Tyreek and Waddle are pretty much locked in must starts, especially with some of the tough start sits across the league this week. I think the floor is there. The ceiling's definitely there for Waddle too. So yeah, I'm definitely starting Jalen Waddle this week.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a little bit on the risky side, but looking at the game matchup, it's kind of one where you just have to take advantage of it. And guys, make sure to comment your start sit questions. We're about to get into our sits very soon, but we want to make sure we cover all of our bases and get you guys the right questions answered. And we will look at our last start potentially with Quinshon Judkins versus the Packers. And this is one that does need a lot of conversation because we have a lot of fantasy managers that are dealing with Quinshon Judkins, dealing with even Jerome Ford at times. I personally think you should have dropped him by now. And Dylan Sampson, who seems to be using a ton of the pass game. Sam, what do we think about Quinshon Judkins, who saw 27% of the snaps, but had 10 carries and seemed like essentially the RB1 in his first game back, where he was only supposed to see 10, 15 snaps?
Yeah, I threw this one on the show sheet because it definitely felt worth discussing to me. This is another one of my big L's, definitely in best ball. I didn't draft Judkins almost at all, even though I was so into this rookie class. I was very high on Judkins as a prospect. I just thought the risk of him being a zero all season was too high, and I wasn't willing to take on that risk in best ball, and that's definitely coming back to bite me. I really did not expect to see Judkins getting 10 carries here in week two. I mean, he missed one game. The dude practiced twice, and he still gets 10 carries, 3 targets in his very first game. And you got to think he had access to the playbook before those first couple of practices. I don't really know how that would be possible to get the ball this much when you've only practiced on the team twice. Maybe running back is the easiest position to just kind of slide in there. Hey, we're running this way, this play in the huddle type of thing. But yeah, this is the floor, I feel like, for Judkins moving forward. And I think the thing not to overlook with Quinshon Judkins is this is a really, really talented prospect. Like, this could be one of the best and most efficient runners in the league this season. And we saw that a bit already in week one. He had 6.1 yards per carry versus the Ravens. This Packers defense is so strong. The Browns are running a ton of plays at the same time. They're also targeting the running back near the highest rate in the NFL. And Judkins is a capable pass catcher. He played alongside Trevion Henderson in college, so that deflated his receiving numbers a little bit more than I think would have been otherwise if Henderson wasn't on the team alongside him. So yeah, I think Judkins is a very interesting start here in week three. The Browns are going to have to push it against a really, really strong defense. And again, I just think this 10 points he got here in week two, like, this to me is basically his floor moving forward. He's going to get a full week of practice. Now, I still think there's a chance he gets suspended this season too. That would obviously be good for my best ball bag since I didn't draft him almost at all. But yeah, here in week three, I don't think the suspension will come anytime soon. And so yeah, I'm definitely starting him against the Packers if I have a tough running back to slot.
Seth, do you have any voice of reason about Quinshon Judkins and why he needs to be sat against a very good Packers defense, all things considered?
Yeah, that's like the main concern. I think when you're losing by like 30 points, it is an opportunity to get your new guy into the lineup in a game that the Browns they didn't really have much of a chance. So that's my one concern. Against the Packers haven't been blowing teams away. They've been winning, but like in both the Packers games, I believe the opponent has scored a touchdown like near the end of the game, and suddenly they're within like 2 scores like right away, or they're down 10 points, and it feels like, oh, it hasn't felt close at all. Now suddenly it is. I don't know if the Browns like the amount of first downs they get in this game, it seems like it's going to be so limited. That's my concern, is like they're going to be passing, they're going to be 3-and-outing, and the Packers are just going to dominate this game without making it so big of a lead that the Browns are just kind of trying stuff out. So that's my one concern. I probably am leaning towards. I'm looking kind of for fantasy football laws, like bench your wide receiver against Pat Surtain. So far, that's stood up well. Maybe bench your running back against the Browns is probably a good idea, but I think also benching most of your players against the Packers after what they did to the Commanders Commanders are way better, and they absolutely locked them up. Detroit dropped 50 points week 2, and the Packers made them look awful. I'm kind of scared for the Browns this week.
Yeah, the Packers defense is definitely legit. It definitely feels like the best defense in the league. Just watching how impactful that defense has been. I will just note, before the NFL draft, our player comp for Quinshon Judkins was Nick Chubb. And so he really does slide in to this Nick Chubb role, I think, perfectly as a prospect. Definitely a tough matchup, to be fair. But yeah, again, I just think it's floor. 10 points, no touchdown here in week 2 against the Ravens. They were getting crushed in this game as well. I definitely think his floor is around there moving forward. He's going to play more in week 3 than week 2.
Yeah, and speaking of the Nick Chubb comparison, let's go ahead and look him up in the WalterPicks app and look at his stats, because we have him as a potential sit here, even in a positive matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. A lot of people are likely going to be throwing him into their starting lineup, and his involvement hasn't necessarily been terrible. In week 1, 13 attempts for 60 yards, 4.6 yards per carry, and then last week we just saw 12 carries for 43 and a touchdown. His fantasy point numbers haven't been terrible, but it still is relatively a committee backfield system with what we're seeing. Seth, how do you feel about Nick Chubb against this matchup?
Bench. No, he scored all of his points at like the last play of the game. Like, and I know my commenters have been reminding me the last play of the game still counts for fantasy football. But when somebody gets like 20 yards and a touchdown on the last play of the game, that's a bad sign. And that's all their points. That was like 8 fantasy points right there out of his 15. I'm pretty worried about Nick Chubb. And even though he's facing the Jaguars, they did pretty good against Chase Brown. I believe Chase Brown had a pretty bad week last week, and he did good against the Browns week 1. So it's not like Chase Brown is a scrub by any means. We know he's great for fantasy football.
8.5 PPR points for Chase Brown last week. He had 16 carries and 3 targets too.
Yeah, so I'm just, Nick Chubb hasn't been efficient. He hasn't been that effective. He did have a big touchdown. I didn't see the play. I was following live, just in the play-by-play, but it was just a tight area of the field where, you know, he broke it and he scored the touchdown. But I'm gonna bench Nick Chubb this week unless you have to start him. I mean, he's got some touchdown upside maybe, but even in yesterday's game, it didn't look promising.
Yeah, the problem for me with Nick Chubb is the receiving role. Still, he ran 8 total routes last night, and he still had 2 catches on those routes and 29 yards. That's probably the ceiling outcome for him in the receiving game. And the only production we've seen against this defense, against the Jaguars, came in week 1. Chuba Hubbard, 3 catches, 32 yards, and a receiving touchdown. It's just not going to happen for Nick Chubb here in week 3. I also think they will start to mix in Woody Marks a little bit more. He actually looked pretty good last night in his limited usage, and he's definitely the better receiving back. Him and Agumbawale are better receiving backs than Nick Chubb. So yeah, not the type of player I love to start either, especially in matchups where we've seen pretty good running backs, Hubbard and Brown, like kind of be stifled on the ground against the Jags.
Yeah, and another running back that we should look at is Josh Jacobs. Now, in good faith, can I tell you to leave him on your bench? The answer is probably going to be no. But if we look at this matchup against the Cleveland Browns, it is definitely one to be worried about. We just saw them hold Derrick Henry to 11 carries for 23 yards, probably his worst game in a year, if we're being honest. And now we get Josh Jacobs. Now, he does have more receiving upside than Derrick Henry, so he can be saved in that way. And he also has looked great. In week 1, he had 19 carries for 66 yards and a touchdown. And then we just saw last week 23 carries for 84 and another touchdown. They're also missing Jaden Reed, so that could be even more of a reason to just use him. But the Cleveland Browns defensive line, Myles Garrett, and this defense in general is 100% one to be worried about. Seth, what are we looking at for this matchup? What can we expect from Josh Jacobs?
Man, you summed it up perfectly there, because this Cleveland Browns defense is incredible. I love a good defense, and I was tuning into that game on a regular basis just to see. They made some comments that they could tackle Derrick Henry. They certainly could. But the thing here, I think, that we get with Jacobs is just opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, because you see the rush share, 3rd in the league, 76%. You think about how good the Packers defense is. The Browns are just not going to be able to move the ball. It's just not going to happen. So the Packers are going to have the ball the entire game. And I don't think at that point they're going to be tired. They're going to be worn down. They're not as flashy as the Ravens are in terms of having the Lamar Jackson running and the receivers that Lamar Jackson. It's just impossible to stop the Ravens. The Packers is a little bit more concentrated between Jacobs. I think Tucker Kraft going to be awesome this week. And then a wide receiver, maybe Matthew Golden has a good week as well. But since it's so concentrated, I personally, I'm going to leave him in my lineups. I don't have the luxury of having some of these like Jordan Mason may be better. Some of the other guys we've talked about in the start section may be better. But on the teams where I have Josh Jacobs, I loaded up on some other positions later on, and I hope he scores a touchdown.
Yeah, if you have the luxury to bench Jacobs, I think it's reasonable with what we just saw from King Henry last week. You mentioned the receiving role for Jacobs, Avery, and I think it will be there, but it has not been there this season. He has one target this season that came in week 1, and I think he caught that for 4 yards. So he's one catch for 4 yards through 2 games. That's why he hasn't even hit 15 PPR points this season, despite the big rushing role and the touchdowns. He's gotten basically 0 in the receiving game, which is a little bit scary and concerning, I think, for him if this sticks. That has me a tiny bit concerned here versus the Browns. This Browns defensive line is legit. This might be a top 5, top 3 even defensive line in the league. Also, just a note, just a massive discrepancy in this game. The Browns lead the NFL in pass attempts per game at 46.5. The Packers are down in the bottom 6 at 26.5. A 20 pass attempt per game difference between these two teams that are playing each other. Obviously, that bodes well for Jacobs since he's getting the bulk of the carries. But yeah, no games over 15 points is definitely a little bit scary, and it all has to do with the receiving role so far for Jacobs. So hopefully we do see more work there. But yeah, I think you kind of have to start him. Like, he's one of these guys you kind of have to start every week with the role that he is seeing.
Yeah. And speaking of a guy that doesn't get a lot of receiving usage in the backfield, look up Omarion Hampton, Seth. We just saw him play. Definitely one of the least exciting showings. Last week, 8 carries for 24 yards, and that was literally it. He got 2 targets out of the backfield, but it just turned into 1 catch for a yard. It's definitely a little bit worrisome now coming into this matchup against the Denver Broncos, who, again, has one of the better defenses in the NFL. On the bright side, Justin Herbert's looking great. In the past game, this offense is looking good. Can we expect Omarion Hampton to do anything in this matchup? I'll go ahead and pass this one off to start out with Sam.
I don't think you can start Hampton right now. The Broncos, Jonathan Taylor just had a massive game versus them in week 2. Jonathan Taylor looking like arguably the number 1 running back in fantasy. I don't think there's a running back with a better role than Jonathan Taylor, but I was a little nervous about Hampton. I talked about it on the Sunday Morning Live. Make sure you're tuning into the Sunday Morning Lives, by the way, the best time of the week. I'm live multiple hours leading up to kickoff every single Sunday. Avery joined last week. I think, Seth, you'll be joining this week. Yes, but we talked about how, similar to what I was just saying in some of these other cases, like with Judkins, where his floor kind of is what he did last week, given the circumstance. I thought Najee Harris's floor was kind of similar coming into week 1. He barely practiced at all, missed all preseason, and he played more here in week 2, had a bigger role in week 2, went from a 4% rush share in week 1 to a 31% rush share in week 2, and stole 2 targets in the backfield, and honestly played better than Hampton for most of the game. The yards per carry is a little bit misleading for Hampton because he had 2 or 3 goal line carries that all got stuffed. The maximum yards he could have gained on those was 1, but still not a great sign. He's getting stuffed at the goal line, getting multiple chances. That's exactly where we need Hampton to really convert, for him to produce at the cost we spent on him in fantasy. Yeah, I'm benching Hampton if I can. Honestly, Hampton versus Judkins, like a pretty close call for me here in week 3, and I might lean towards Judkins. The sole hope for Hampton right now, and I still think he's a really talented prospect coming out of college, is just the Chargers offense has looked great, and he's a part of the offense, and that might just flow through to him eventually as he gets up to speed. But yeah, I honestly might prefer Judkins over Hampton. I'm curious what you guys think about that specific starts it, how you guys would handle that.
I think I'm with you on that. The floor, like you said, for Judkins probably is the 10 points. I'm like, when we're talking start sit, I'm looking for a little bit more than that, and I think he may be around that. But Hampton has been worse, and it's honestly, it didn't bode well. His first preseason carry, we were watching that he tried to bounce it outside on a corner or a safety, and he couldn't do it. And it's like, welcome to the NFL, buddy. Like, these people are faster, they're stronger, they're better. And when he played at North Carolina, he's playing, like what's it? Will Campbell
Syracuse
says those guys are working at Amazon now, and nothing wrong with that. To quote Will Campbell, but he's playing some real NFL competition, and he just doesn't look as up to the bill at this point. I'm sure, he's got some talent. He'll probably get there. But right now, I would probably sit him for Judkins this week.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable. And we look at some guys that honestly is giving people some heart attacks right now. We look at AJ Brown and we look at this entire Eagles offense outside of Saquon Barkley, of course. It's definitely worrisome, but we can't say this is not what we expected. Jalen Hurts averaging 22.5 passing attempts per game through the first 2 weeks, 19 completions in week 1, 15 completions in week 2, has not thrown a passing touchdown, and is averaging 130 passing yards a game and winning these games. Last year, Jalen Hurts averaged 16.5 completions per game and was the quarterback 34. So backup quarterbacks were coming in and completing more passes than him. And it looks like we're on that trajectory again. AJ Brown, who I thought was going to have a better game against the Chiefs since they play a lot more man coverage, had the potential. He had his 8 targets, only turned it into 27 yards, though. Obviously, no touchdowns. If Jalen Hurts is not passing for touchdowns, I don't know if AJ Brown or Devonta Smith can really just be started in good faith. Now, AJ Brown, I'll still leave in my lineup because he did out-target Devonta Smith. He finished with less fantasy points, but it's just such an ugly situation. And now we deal with the Rams defense, who has been very good so far this year. Seth, what are you doing with these receivers?
Honestly, as someone who's been watching a lot of Bills games in my lifetime, it's very reminiscent of their offense. Why would you ever pass deep? You absolutely don't need to. Jalen Hurts can run the ball. Saquon Barkley can run the ball. You can effectively take care of the ball, greatly reduce the interception risk, take a deep shot when you want to. They're not going to expect it. There's absolutely no reason to throw it downfield to AJ Brown. So I don't think they're going to do it. They could win every game this season doing exactly what they've been doing. Heading over the game log, the Rams, I mean, they struggled against the Titans in the first half. Titans are, I think, better than people give them credit for, but they're probably going to grind out these games. And I don't really see too many, like I'm circling this game against the Packers. That is a potential NFC Championship matchup. But till then, I think they just walk through these teams. And there's absolutely, and by walk through these teams, I think they run through these teams and they don't need to pass. So as much as it is frustrating to put look at Kansas City. They're the 32nd ranked pass defense after week 1. The Chargers lit them up. Keenan Allen, Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston popped off. And AJ Brown has 7.7 PPR points. So I'm putting him on the bench. They just don't pass enough. If he scores a touchdown, you'll regret it. But if he doesn't score a touchdown, you'll be happy he's on your bench.
Just a couple of quick notes here. When we talked about the Eagles all together before the season, we were bashing on this situation, and I was nervous about that afterwards, thinking about it more. Like the Eagles had a historically low pass rate last season, and it's really rare we see like historically low rates like that repeated. And Jalen Hurts somehow he's throwing less so far this season than last season. I mean, truly incredible to wrap your head around. This was one of the lowest pass rates in the last decade last year, and he's throwing less than that so far this season. AJ Brown against the Rams in the playoffs. There was snow in that game. 2 catches, 14 yards, no touchdown. Jalen Hurts completed 15 passes in that game versus the Rams. Saquon ran wild in that game. There's no reason to think they aren't going to be able to lean on Saquon. The other note, though, just I don't want to fully panic on AJ Brown. AJ Brown has been top 10 in yards per route run in back-to-back seasons. Right now, he's at 0.8 yards per route run. Like that's like a third of his historical efficiency. He's gonna rebound at some point and get back closer to his historical average efficiency. I think probably not going to be here in week 3 though, and definitely a really sketchy start right now. I just don't want to sell low on AJ Brown because we know the efficiency's there historically. The touchdowns can and will come for him, but it's hard to expect it like anytime super soon. So yeah, tough spot for fantasy. I would prefer to bench him right now.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair note. I am on the train of being scared for this past game, just historically from what we've seen. But another game that we might have to worry about with the passing here is Calvin Ridley and the Titans here. They get a matchup against the Colts, which their defense has been good. If you look at Cam Ward, he's averaging about 30 passing attempts in his first 2 games, 150 yards passing. In week 1, Calvin Ridley did not have a great game, mostly because of the Pat Surtain situation. If you've been around this channel long enough, you understand. And then in week 2, he comes out against the Rams, which again is a really good defense. 3 catches for 57 yards. Yeah, Sam, what are we doing against the Colts defense with Calvin Ridley?
We've seen one player go over 10.5 points against this Colts defense at the receiver position. And that was this past week. Troy Franklin went 8 for 89 in a touchdown. He's not, so different than the role that Ridley might play. So there's at least maybe a ceiling, but every other player, that includes Tyreek, that includes Jalen Waddle. Cortland Sutton had 1.6 points last week, which feels the most worrisome when you think about Calvin Ridley. The Colts defense seemingly is really good at just taking away the opposing top player. They did it with Tyreek and Waddle. They did it with Sutton last week. Again, 1 catch, 6 yards for Sutton. He played almost every single snap in the game. I think the Colts will effectively push the ball away from Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley's honestly a guy I kind of want to buy low on right now because, really, really tough opening stretch here for Cam Ward and Ridley. They play the Broncos in week 1. They rank top 2 against receivers right now. They play the Rams in week 2. They rank top 8 against receivers right now. Now they get the Colts in week 3. They rank top 10 against receivers. Sutton just had a point. He's probably going to disappoint this week. Not a guy I want to trust in my lineup. But then we see the stretch of games open up. And by the time he gets the Pats there in week 7, hopefully Gonzalez is back for the Pats. And that might actually be tough for Ridley. But yeah, I want to buy low. I still think the role here is good. I think Cam Ward's actually looked pretty promising. Had some really, really good moments so far, despite the tough matchups. But the floor for Ridley is what we saw from Sutton last week, which is 1.6 points. And that's not the type of floor I'm looking for in my fantasy lineups.
Yeah, there's definitely some worry there. And another guy that had some worry is Brenton Strange. Now, this is a tight end that I've been buying in on for the offensive purposes here. But last week, 42 pass attempts for Trevor Lawrence. He only comes away with 5 targets, 3 receptions for 17 yards. Terrible game on his side. And now he gets a matchup against the Houston Texans, which is definitely more positive than what we just saw with the Cincinnati Bengals last week. Sam, are we trusting Brenton Strange? Is this a moment where he can have his bounce back rebound game, or is this another sit against the Texans defense?
I don't know how we can trust Brenton Strange. This is really tough for me to say. I've been in on #Strange season, all offseason long. And there's just too many tight ends that are looking pretty promising right now that you could probably have or can go get. I'm easily starting Juwan Johnson over him. I'm easily starting Zach Ertz and Harold Fannin over him. I'm easily starting Jake Ferguson after last week over him. I'd easily start Kyle Pitts over him as well with how good Kyle Pitts has looked. I think I'd probably consider Hunter Henry over him as well. And we have him ranked right next to Theo Johnson. Like that's where he ranks this week. And the playing time has been promising. He saw an uptick in actually snaps, 90% snap percentage last week. He ran 33 routes. Yeah, just 12% target share, not getting really end zone or red zone looks. He has 0 targets in the red zone so far this season. Every time they get in the red zone, they're either running it with one of the running backs or they're peppering Travis Hunter or Brian Thomas Jr., who had like a million incomplete red zone targets this week. So yeah, Brenton Strange is definitely like a desperation play at this moment, where seemingly they're suddenly after like the top tier of tight ends with McBride, and if you want to put Bowers in there at full health, I'm still fine with that. There's like this long tier of like sudden depth in tier 2 or tier 3 of these tight ends all the way down, through some of those guys I just mentioned. Even Jonnu Smith in the #revenge game versus the Pats, I'd probably start him over Brenton Strange. So yeah, I just think in most leagues, you got a better option than Strange. And so therefore he is a bench. My best ball teams will still be praying for Brenton Strange, but I won't be starting him in any of the leagues I have him in. I have either Juwan Johnson or Harold Fannin in almost every league where I'm Brenton Strange. And part of the reason I like Strange in draft season too is it's okay if you drafted a late round tight end and it doesn't work out. We found these other guys. Now start the other guys that are in better spots. And I think that we paid basically nothing to get Brenton Strange. He went undrafted in tons of leagues. And part of the benefit of that is just being able to figure it out, piece it together off the waivers. And that's what I would prefer to do here in week 3.
Yeah, and I will say there is some positives to him playing 90% of the snaps. If we look at last year, I believe Evan Ingram only met that mark twice. So there is something to be said about that. Maybe he does turn it up at some point in the season. But guys, that is going to finish it for our start sit video of this week. We went through all of our top starts and sits. Let us know in the comments what questions you have that you've been itching to get answered. And this is one of the earliest start sit shows that there is. So make sure to be subscribed for this. You get it every single week, as long as some waiver wire videos and live streams from all 3 of us. Make sure to be sticking around for that. And we will see you guys in the next one coming very soon.